Demo discs are sadly a relic of a time long past, especially with the wider access to high-speed internet connections making downloads fast and easy. Demo discs are remnants of an era where young gamers looked forward to their weekly Blockbuster visit or monthly EB Games trip like it was a holy ritual. If they were stuck on a game, the first choice wasn't to take out a smartphone and look up a video on YouTube. Those things didn't exist yet. No, they bought a strategy guide, likely published by Brady Games, or a small book of tips, tricks, and cheats, or if they were desperate, a Game Shark to totally break the game. They could also stay up to date with the industry by simply going to their local Kmart and buying any of the dozen or so active and popular game magazines crammed with news, reviews, previews, and interviews. For a lot of people, that was more or less the only way to stay up to date regardless. And some of those magazines had a special extra something for the readers. They had those demo discs. But for those of you who are too young to have experienced this era for yourselves, it's important to know that demo discs were not only available in magazines. Sometimes they were available for order from little forms that came in game manuals that you could tear out, fill, and mail. Sometimes demo discs were even part of promotional campaigns with food. Today, you could buy a bottle of Mountain Dew or a Crunch Bar and get a code for in-game currency, some sort of cosmetic, or a piece of equipment. But in the late 90s to early 2000s, you bought a pizza and got a disc full of different demos to play over and over again. These discs weren't only filled with demos either. They often contained trailers, video interviews with legendary developers, behind-the-scenes documentaries, tips and cheats, and even more amazingly, they would sometimes contain unique exclusive content you could download to your memory card, basically similar to current-day DLC. It was incredible. Plenty of demos were also included with another game as a cherry on top to score more sales. And it worked. For example, Tobal No. 1, a 3D fighting game from Dream Factory and published by Squaresoft, had the demo for Final Fantasy VII on it, and you can be damn sure that it helped sell more copies. Some people scrambled to buy Tobal No. 1 just to play that demo. Crash Bandicoot and Spyro also regularly had demos for each other's upcoming game when the newest installment for each series came out. We kinda take demos for granted nowadays because they're so easy to access. Just open up Steam or start up your console of choice, move over to the store, and there's probably a whole section of them right there. But in the old days, demos needed to be paid for and acquired by either snail mail or leaving your house to go on a short adventure for it. And not only were people okay with that, but they were actively sought after due to how limited access was to them. In some cases, this ended up being worthwhile in hindsight, from a historical standpoint, because demos back then were sometimes radically different from the final release. The occasional demo straight up shuffled early and mid-game content to handcraft a good first impression, and it's cool to go back and see the changes and compare the demo to the final product. However, despite how sought after these precious discs were, there's not that many discussions on which were the best. They were so crucial to building hype for and marketing a game, I feel like they deserve the occasional conversation on what the most effective ones were. Which discs had the strongest collection of heavy hitters? This is the question that periodically appeared in my mind over and over again. Now sadly, I missed out on a lot of PS1 demo discs growing up because I got a PlayStation 1 a few years late. However, with current-day technology and preservation efforts, I'm able to go back and acquire many of these discs to gain a better perspective on what other, more in-the-know gamers were playing back then. And that's exactly what I did. I won't be talking about every single one of them because that would make this video extremely long and extremely repetitive, because a lot of discs had overlap in content, including the best ones. At the end of the day, most people didn't actually get demo discs terribly often. Instead, I'll be focusing on a few discs, ones that I think are the top contenders for the best discs in their categories. And what are the categories? Well, if you already had a PlayStation 1, you had two primary methods of acquiring demo discs on a regular basis. The first was being subscribed to the official US PlayStation magazine, or OPM, a monthly publication that included a demo disc with every single issue. The second was being subscribed to PlayStation Underground, another magazine that released quarterly instead of monthly. And the reason I have the word magazine in quotes here is because it wasn't printed on paper like OPM was. Instead, PlayStation Underground was entirely on CD, and all content was video-based. Not only that, but it had so much content that it required 2 discs instead of just 1. If you wanted a regular supply of demos with a magazine as a cherry on top, then you went with OPM. But if you wanted the most bang for your buck, you had to subscribe to PlayStation Underground. Beyond those 2 methods, there's a couple other ways to get demos. The most obvious is buying a PlayStation, because many SKUs had a demo disc bundled with them, and there was a different disc every few months. And lastly, there's cross-promotion. Remember earlier when I said you could buy a pizza and get a demo disc with it? That wasn't an exaggeration. That actually happened. There was a legendary promotion between PlayStation and Pizza Hut where customers would get one of 2 different demo discs when they ordered their delicious pie. These discs were probably the most popular and circulated demo discs in the entire PS1 era, besides the discs that were bundled with the console itself. Obviously, there's also store demos, which were placed in kiosks in places like Best Buy, Kmart, or EB Games, as well as single-game demo discs, but to keep the scope of this video more focused, I'm only going to be touching on consumer discs containing multiple game demos that players could acquire directly. Now, with all that information in mind, it seems like a no-brainer which kind of demo disc would be the best. But I don't want to undersell anything here. I especially don't want to skimp over how good the Pizza Hut demos actually were. You might think that a disc that came with a pizza might not be all that good. You might assume it had 2 or 3 mid-tier demos for mildly popular games at best. But in reality, the games chosen for these discs were all excellent. In fact, I think this is going to be our first deep dive of the video. The Pizza Hut promotional demo discs. So what's interesting about this is that there's a total of 3 Pizza Hut demo discs across 2 separate promotions. The first was in 1998, and it featured 1 disc. It contained playable demos for Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, Medieval, Tomb Raider 3, and Crash Bandicoot Warped. It wasn't a big disc, but as you can tell, the games it included would go on to be hits. The Metal Gear Solid demo featured the iconic opening, and Gran Turismo was small with only 1 track and a couple cars, but effective in showing off its graphics and controls. The Crash Bandicoot Warped demo was honestly kind of unfortunate because it was just a single underwater level that showcases only a fraction of what the game was capable of. Honestly, there's way better levels in the game that could have taken the place of this one. Overall though, as a little something that came with a pizza, you can make a much worse demo disc than this. The second Pizza Hut promotion, which was a year later, was the big one. This is the one that most PlayStation gamers at the time remember. It offered 2 different discs, each with their own set of demos. There was no overlap at all. Disc 2 might be considered the weaker of the 2 depending on who you ask, but it still had some great stuff in it. Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, Tomb Raider The Last Revelation, The Next Tetris, Sledstorm, and Gran Turismo 2. Spyro 2 featured 2 levels that were very different from each other and did a great job of showcasing some of the game's strengths in controls and art direction. Sledstorm and Gran Turismo 2 were very different racing games but were adequate in selling the speed and tricks of the former and the more realistic physics and detailed graphics of the latter. If there's any real disappointment here, it's probably The Next Tetris, not because the demo itself is bad, but because the game just feels sluggish to other, better versions of the Tetris experience. But if you like Tetris and you're into this game's more industrial 3D presentation, it could probably still convince you to buy the full game. Disc 1 of this Pizza Hut promotion, however, was definitely the most popular and sought after one. Not because Disc 2 was bad by any means, as we just saw, it was actually loaded. It's just that Disc 1 was somehow even better. It had Ape Escape, Crash Team Racing, Cool Borders 4, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and Final Fantasy VIII. Now, I'll be the first to admit I am a bit biased here. Disc 1 was actually one of the few PS1 demo discs I got a hold of as a kid, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. This disc is how a lot of people got to experience the legendary warehouse level of the first Tony Hawk game, complete with Goldfinger's Superman blasting in the background. I didn't immediately buy any of the Tony Hawk games just yet, but I did play this demo over and over. It wasn't until Tony Hawk's Underground for the PS2 that I truly became a huge fan of the series. The Crash Team Racing demo was also really fun, and it did lead me to buying the game eventually. I played it a ton. Going from the SNES to the PlayStation between generations was quite a bit of a hit for me, because even though I loved the PS1, I knew I would miss out on some games from Nintendo, especially Mario Kart. So it was nice to see the PS1 get a good kart racer of its own. The Ape Escape demo was fairly big and covers the first few levels of the game. If there's any weak link here at all, it's Cool Borders 4, because it's just one brief race and you can't even pick your border. But the biggest impact this game had on me was something else. I've mentioned it before in other videos, but my first Final Fantasy was actually 8, and this demo is why. When I first booted up the FF8 demo, I did not know what to expect. So imagine the surprise on little 7-year-old me's face when I got to experience those CG cutscenes for the first time, and those awesome graphics with so many cool effects. Up until that point, I almost exclusively played platformers. This demo was my first ever brush with a story-focused game of such a grand scale. I played through the demo so many times that I can recall major changes between it and the final product without even needing to go back and play either. The demo itself takes place in the early game seed exam, which was the invasion of the town of Dalit. The first major change is all the characters' outfits. Squall and Zell were in their garden uniforms in the final game, not their casual clothes like in the demo. And this is also true for the CG cutscene of Squall on the boat riding up to shore. The second biggest change is Rinoa. She's in the demo, but she's nowhere close to being playable in this part of the story in the final game. She comes into play much later. And the third biggest change is the summons. I remember summoning Leviathan every single time I could because I loved its animation. But unfortunately, in the final product, Leviathan is also nowhere close to this portion of the game. This is what I meant when I said some demos mixed early and mid-game content to make a better impression. But it worked. It absolutely fucking got me to spend the little money I had as a child to buy Final Fantasy VIII, and I put an embarrassing amount of hours into it. Partially because I didn't fully understand the junction system then, which led me to fully restarting the game multiple times. But I didn't mind. Most people would be frustrated at that, but I actually loved doing it. Sometimes I started a new game just because I felt like it. I have since played every mainline Final Fantasy title and am a huge fan of the franchise in general, and it's all because of this demo. I wouldn't necessarily put Pizza Hut 1999 Demo Disc 1 as the absolute best demo disc for the PS1, but in terms of accessibility and sheer influence it had on me and probably many others, its importance cannot be denied. Speaking of importance, it's important to me that you check out my merch store. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, a sliced skull and a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already received samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit mildconviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the video. The next main method of acquiring demo discs is being subscribed to the official US PlayStation magazine. It was a monthly thing, but that didn't mean the demo discs were weak. OPM managed to cram plenty of good shit into every disc every month, and there were very few real stinkers. Some months were unfortunate enough to only get 1 or 2 demos, but others were packed with 6 or more. Also, the content of the discs were affected by marketing campaigns for certain titles, so there are occasions where older demos of games that have already released pop up later multiple times. There's a grand total of 52 OPM demo discs for the PlayStation 1. After that, their demo discs were only for the PS2, which we might talk about in a future video, maybe. Being the thorough guy that I am, I went ahead and sought out and downloaded every single one to check out, and there's a few big winners here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going over every single demo disc in this video because that's just more work than I've bargained for, and it would probably be boring because of all the overlap. But I am going to go into the heavy hitters that subscribers or purchasers of loose issues would have been fortunate to have, meaning this list is going to be quite curated and might exclude discs that were extremely influential to others. Now, I would say the first noteworthy disc was actually issue 2, which features demos for Armored Core, Colony Wars, Cool Borders 2, Croc, Crash Bandicoot 2, and Madden 98. It also had videos for Ghost in the Shell and NHL Face-Off 98. All the demos were short and sweet, able to be finished in as little as 3 minutes, but in some cases you could stretch it out and take your time. If there's one standout among this group though, I would say it's Armored Core, which contains 2 missions and a small taste of AC customization. Another solid issue was 15, which contained A Bug's Life, Bomberman World, Crash Bandicoot Warped, Gran Turismo, Invasion from Beyond, Kagero Deception 2, Metal Gear Solid, Running Wild, and Tomb Raider 3. Deception 2 was a pretty generous demo for its time, containing a tutorial level and multiple stages after that. And even though it wasn't a classic or anything, Running Wild's demo was fairly generous for a racing game as well, with 3 playable characters and 2 tracks. The next notable issue was 22, with Ape Escape, Bloody Roar 2, Croc 2, Interplay Sports Baseball 2000, MLB 2000, The Next Tetris, Soul of the Samurai, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The Bloody Roar 2 demo, while fun, was unfortunately sparse with only 2 playable characters and 1 stage. And to make it even more frustrating, you had to reset the console entirely to leave the demo and go back to the main menu. Soul of the Samurai was quite big, allowing you to play the intros for both Kotaro and Lin. And of course, for any baseball fans out there, you had 2 games to try out. The next notable issue is 26, which featured demos for 40 Winks, Cool Borders 3, Crash Bandicoot Warped Again, Grandia, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, Killer Loop, and NFL Blitz 2000. The Cool Borders 3 demo was pretty paltry, offering only 1 race with no choice in border, board design, or track. Crash Bandicoot Warped was thankfully not the same underwater demo as we saw before, but instead a race level where you control Coco riding Pura the Tiger. Again, only 1 level and pretty short though. Grandia's demo was pretty interesting, combining 2 different parts of the game that you can select at the main menu. A battle demo where you roam around the overworld and fight, and a story-focused demo where you wander around town to talk to people. If there's one aspect of this demo disc that I'm not fond of, it's the unskippable 70-second Mark Echo ad you had to sit through every time you started up. We're gonna jump pretty far ahead for our next notable demo disc, not because the others are bad, but because we have to be choosy if we don't want this video to be hours long. The next issue is 44, which contains playable demos for Ape Escape, Cool Borders 2001, The Emperor's New Groove, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver Again, Legend of Dragoon, Medieval 2, Metal Gear Solid, Siphon Filter 2, and Tekken 3. As you've probably noticed by this list, we're getting into territory where we're starting to circle back around to older games, likely because of marketing purposes. But as you can see, it's not all bad considering how strong the lineup is. Unfortunately, Cool Borders maintains its streak of disappointing demos with one trick race with no other competitors. Just you going downhill on one track, with one character in about a minute. Pretty mediocre. Legend of Dragoon's demo, on the other hand, was a pretty robust chunk of story. If you took your time with it, you could probably get a full hour out of it. Siphon Filter 2 was nothing all that amazing, just Gabe running along a train, shooting down enemies. Only lasts about 5 minutes if you know what you're doing. Tekken 3's demo was unfortunately nothing too special, only 2 characters and 1 stage, but neither of those characters were Jin, funnily enough. Surprisingly, they were Eddie and Xiao Yu instead. Now, the last OPM demo disc we'll be touching on is issue 50, which I consider to be the true farewell disc for the PlayStation 1 era of the magazine. Now, even though it would get 2 more discs after this one, they were pretty disappointing, because the PlayStation 2 was already out and taking over the industry. Issue 50's demo disc was quite stacked, featuring demos for Barbie Explorer, Crash Bandicoot Warped Yet Again, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, Spyro Year of the Dragon, Siphon Filter 2, Tekken 3, Twisted Metal 2, and X-Men Mutant Academy 2. It's a robust lineup of already released hits. Spider-Man 2 included 1 level of the game and a sort of combat practice level where you could just swing around and beat up baddies. X-Men Mutant Academy 2 was pretty generous for a fighting game demo by offering 5 characters to play as: Cyclops, Havoc, Mystique, Magneto, and Nightcrawler. Barbie Explorer offered 2 levels to complete, and in case you never played it before, it's basically what would happen if someone took Tomb Raider and turned it into a kinda less interesting Crash Bandicoot. Speaking of, the demo for Warped here is the same Coco and Purah level we saw earlier in the video. And Tekken 3 is the same demo that offered only Eddie and Xiao Yu. Next, the PlayStation Underground discs. These were the true bang-for-your-buck demos because they were stuffed with enough content to rival a full game almost in potential number of hours you can spend on it. These were not released weekly like OPM. Instead, they were seasonal, meaning 4 per year. Yeah, with all that content came a lot of waiting for each issue, but it was always worth it. Even if you walked away not feeling any of the 5 to 10 demos, you still had trailers, previews, interviews, tips and cheats, and making of videos to watch. Plus, bonus content to download from the disc and into your memory card. And as a special cherry on top, some issues even had an imports section that contained a demo for the Japanese version of a game, and some of these games never made it to the West at all, so the only way you can get them here in America was to get the PlayStation Underground issue thereon. For example, there was Metal Slug Super Vehicle 001, which was the import demo for Volume 1 Issue 4, and Puyo Puyo Sun, which was the import demo for Volume 2 Issue 1. Because issues were only seasonal, there's less than 20 total to look through, as the disc-based magazine only ran until 2001. Sadly, there weren't any for the PS2, but thankfully OPM was there to help pick up the slack on that front. It probably goes without saying, but with so much content to offer, it's much harder to narrow down this batch of demo discs to the best ones, because every single one of them are at least decent and worth checking out. But I did manage to focus it all down to 3 that stood out to me the most. The first Underground issue I want to shine a light on is Volume 1 Issue 3. The first disc had demos for Armored Core, Intelligent Cube, Parappa the Rapper, and Steel Rain. It also had a behind-the-scenes video of Blasto, and the download station had save files for Ogre Battle and Dynasty Warriors. The second disc had demos for Cool Borders 2, Kart World Series, Jet Moto 2, Fighting Force, Croc, Jersey Devil, and Raystorm. Parappa the Rapper featured the famous Chop Chop Master Onion stage. The Steel Rain demo offered up one mission with 3 very different tanks to drive. Fighting Force allowed you to play as any of the 4 playable characters in the final release for one brief stage. and the Kart World Series and Jet Moto 2 demos offered one track to race on, as most racing game demos tend to allow. The next issue is Volume 3, Issue 2. This one contained demos for Sumu, which is the import, Jammerlami, Air Guys, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Soul of the Samurai, Final Fantasy VIII, Ape Escape, 3 Extreme, and MLB 2000. Sumu is a really cute puzzle game where you control a hamster driving a forklift, and you have to stack boxes with images on them to complete them. It's simple and adorable and easy to get into. Jammerlami, just like its rapping predecessor, features a single track with Chop Chop Master Onion. Air Guys unfortunately has only one playable character despite having multiple opponents. And 3 Extreme is a racing game where all racers are either skateboarders, inline skaters, or BMX cyclists, hence the name. But you only get one race and you can't choose your racer. And the final issue I want to highlight is actually the very next one, Volume 3, Issue 3. This demo disc featured Gran Turismo 2, Omega Boost, Tiny Tank, Crash Team Racing, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, Jet Moto 3, NFL Blitz 2000, NFL Extreme 3, Championship Motocross, Metal Gear Solid VR Missions, and Pac-Man World. There's a solid variety of solid games here. 4 different types of racing games, a mecha game, a tank game, 2 NFL games, 2 platformers, and Metal Gear Solid for good measure. It's a packed disc. Omega Boost is an interesting game in case you haven't heard of it before. It's Polyphony Digital's only mecha game, and it is pretty fun, featuring a full level and 2 different types of bosses for this demo specifically. Now, to finish off the PlayStation Underground section, I do want to mention the Jam Pack line, which is a part of the Underground brand, but was its own separate thing. Sometimes Jam Pack demo discs were simply used as a way to market the upcoming Underground issue, which would have even more content. But honestly, Jam Packs were worth getting on their own. In fact, I mentioned just a minute ago that proper PlayStation Underground issues stopped once the PS2 came out, but Jam Pack would continue the spirit of Underground on its own with multiple PS2 issues, going all the way up to 2006. Now, much like PlayStation Underground, it's also difficult to narrow down Jam Packs to the best ones, but I think I managed to single out probably the most content-filled disc out of all of them, Jam Pack Summer 2000. This one had demos for Grind Session, Hot Shots Golf 2, Legend of Dragoon, Medieval 2, NASCAR Rumble, Speed Punks, Spider-Man, Siphon Filter 2, Tomba 2, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. It also had behind-the-scenes videos of Hot Shots Golf 2 and Legend of Dragoon, and the download section had a save file for Medal of Honor that unlocked all secret codes, and a special file for MTV Music Generator that added playable songs made by Sony's third-party quality assurance team. This disc had a little bit of everything for everybody. 2 racing games, 2 platformers, 2 skateboarding games, an RPG, and others. If I were forced to make an argument as to which specific demo disc might be the overall best in terms of content, I would say this would be a good contender. Now, our last set of demo discs is the interactive CD samplers that came bundled with your PlayStation when you bought one. There's a grand total of 11 sampler volumes, a new one every 2 or 3 months for the first few years of the console's lifespan, so there is, admittedly, a lot of overlap. While these CDs did not have reviews or interviews or cheats on them, they actually had, on average, the highest number of playable demos and trailers out of all demo discs mentioned in this video. So if you didn't actually care for the behind-the-scenes content or special save files and only wanted playable demos and trailers, then these samplers were the best. But of course, you couldn't just go out and buy them from the store loose. They were only bundled with the console. If you wanted a volume that was different from your own, then you had to get them second-hand. Again, it was hard to narrow it down because there were only 11 and they were all at least pretty decent. But I was able to single out 3 CDs that seemed to be hitting a little bit above their weight class. First is Sampler Disc 4, which contained demos for Ace Combat 2, Armored Core, Kart World Series, Croc, Intelligent Cube, Parappa the Rapper, Porsche Challenge, Race Storm, Steel Rain, and Treasures of the Deep. There's a lot of overlap with Volume 1, Issue 3 of PlayStation Underground, which I mentioned earlier, because they both came out at around the same time. So if you were not an Underground subscriber, but instead a new PS1 owner, you had a lot to check out. 2 racing games, a mecha game, a flight combat sim, a vehicular combat game, a shoot 'em up, a puzzle game, and a rhythm game. If you liked action and speed, this sampler would have kicked ass. The second sampler volume I want to mention is Sampler Disc 6, which is actually the one I got with my PlayStation when I was a kid. I remember that 6-fingered hand on the front of the sleeve and on the disc very vividly. The demos on this one were Bloody Roar, Cool Borders 2, Crash Bandicoot 2, Gex Enter the Gecko, Hot Shots Golf, Jet Moto, NHL Face-Off 98, Parappa the Rapper, Pitfall 3D, Tomb Raider 2, and WCW Nitro. I remember playing this demo disc all the time, especially when I was between games and didn't have much else to play at all. I played a ton of the Bloody Roar and Crash 2 demos specifically, but weirdly enough I never ended up buying the former. I did, however, buy the latter, and this was the starting point of me becoming a big fan of the Crash Bandicoot series. I would end up also buying Warped, Crash Team Racing, and even the party game spin-off Crash Bash. And the third and last demo disc we'll touch on is Sampler Disc 9, which released in early 1999. It featured playable demos for Crash Bandicoot Warped, Medieval, Spyro the Dragon, Gran Turismo, A Bug's Life, Cool Borders 3, NFL Game Day 99, Rallycross 2, Tomb Raider 3, Wild 9, Bust-A-Move 4, Metal Gear Solid, NHL Face-Off 99, and Brave Fencer Musashi. There's a lot of familiar games here that we've already touched on, but beyond those, Wild 9 offered a lengthy level that could last upwards of 20 to 30 minutes if you weren't already familiar with it, and Brave Fencer Musashi offered a pleasantly surprising 3 different stages to try out. It's unfortunate that only a couple more samplers would be made after this, because if they were spread out a bit more for just a couple more years, they would have done even more to help the PlayStation lineup look more appealing to new owners. But, as it stands, these discs were pretty good at doing what they were meant to do regardless. That's basically everything in regard to key demo discs I wanted to show. But it goes without saying, those are just the tip of the iceberg and represent only a fraction of the discs you can acquire and try. And there's still store demo discs and single game demo discs to consider too. They are remnants of their time, but they were very impactful if you got your hands on the right one that contained the right game. While some demo discs definitely stand head and shoulders above the rest in terms of sheer content crammed into one package, what you might consider to be the best one can simply boil down to whichever had the most influence on you, because that's the main goal of a demo. Some of the PlayStation Underground issues, or some of the Jam Pack discs, or even some of the sampler CDs might be superior in terms of sheer number of demos they offer, as I showed earlier. But even then, I cannot deny the impact that the comparatively smaller Pizza Hut discs had. If I had never gotten my hands on that 1999 promotional disc number 1 containing Final Fantasy VIII, then who knows how much later I would get into Final Fantasy, if at all. In fact, my love of Japanese RPGs in general could be attributed to this demo disc as well. How much different would my taste be today if I never put this disc into my PS1 and started it? It was so long ago and its influence has rippled out so much by now, it's probably impossible to really answer that question. At the end of the day, I'm just thankful it fell into my lap. It had so much of an impact on me that it's quite possibly the most important game I ever played, and it wasn't even a full game at all. It was a demo disc I got from eating a pizza. Now, if you're old enough to have experienced the golden age of demo discs, which were your favorite? Generation does not matter. Let me know in the comments. This concludes my video on the best PlayStation demo discs. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.